This video will discuss beaming in compound meter. Beaming in compound meter follows the same basic principles as beaming in simple meter. The purpose of beaming in any meter is to visually clarify where the beat is, and it therefore makes the notes much easier to read. The challenge in beaming in compound meter is remembering what note gets one beat. For instance, in 6/8 time, the eighth note does not get a beat. It is the dotted quarter note. So when you're grouping notes together to beam, don't beam together all eighth note values. You want to beam together dotted quarter note values. So in this example, you want to beam together all notes with flags that fit into one beat, starting on the beat, and remembering to not beam into quarter notes. So dotted quarter note, nothing can be beamed here. Three eighth notes equals one dotted quarter note, so that's one grouping. 3/8 notes again. Quarter note into an eighth note is beat 1, eighth note into a quarter note is beat 2. Here's a grouping for beat 1, here's a grouping for beat 2. You can imagine that if you were trying to play this rhythm without my markings and arrows, it would be a little bit tricky to decide what fits on the beat. As opposed to looking down at the bottom, here's the same passage which is correctly beamed. This is much more clear. As you're scanning through this and sight reading it, you can very clearly see where the beginning of most of these beats lies. Notice in the third measure that the eighth notes are not beamed together, and that is because beat 1 is filled up by a quarter note into the eighth note. The second eighth note is the beginning of beat 2. So if you beam these two together, you would obscure where the start of the beat is. It would look more like beat 2 is here, and that would be incorrect. Also remember that it is perfectly fine and desirable to beam together differing note values. Here with the dotted eighth note, 16th eighth note, that all fits in beat 1, so they are beamed together. 2 16ths and 2 8ths again all fits on beat 2, so those notes also are all beamed together, and when you look at it you can clearly see that is the beat 1 grouping, that is the beat 2 grouping. So even though this rhythm is more complex, you at least have the advantage of seeing where the beat starts. Here are a couple of exceptions to the rule that beamed notes must always start at the beginning of a beat. In 6/8, a quarter note and 2 16th notes is one dotted quarter value worth. You can't beam this into the quarter note because then that would no longer be a quarter note. But it is still advisable to beam these 2 16th notes together, and the same thing with this starting on the beat. Again, you can't beam into the quarter note. Another example is in 6/4. 6/4, 2 beats per measure, dotted half note gets the beat. So here's beat 1, the dotted half note, quarter note, and 4 eighth notes also equals a dotted half note. And again, the beginning of the beat you can't beam into the quarter note, but the end of the beat with these 4 eighth notes, it is good, and you should beam those together. 6/8 versus 3/4 is a challenging situation, and one that will really test your understanding of the principles of beaming, and an aside, one that you will see from me in quizzes and the like often, because I will be able to see if you understand it. And the reason for this is because 6/8 and 3/4 have exactly the same number of eighth notes per measure. 6 eighth notes. In 3/4 there are also 6 eighth notes, and between the two, if you beam correctly, you are going to be able to see at a glance whether you are in 6/8, in other words compound meter, or 3/4, simple meter. This example at the bottom of the page can be played in either time And without the beaming, you can't tell whether this is meant to be in compound meter or simple meter. So here we are with the example beamed to reflect 6/8. 3/8, 3/8. You can see 1 beat, 2 beat. Here's beat 1, beat 2, and so on. This is going to sound like this. Here's our pulse. Do da dee do da dee do. Do da dee do da dee do do. In 3/4, notice that because you want 3 quarter note values beamed together, we have 2/8 notes, 2/8 notes, 2/8 notes. You can clearly see that there are 3 beats. When you have a dotted quarter note in 3/4 time, you leave the 8th note at the end of beat 2 alone, and then you can see again that this beat 3 set of 2/8 notes is distinct from the 6/8 set of 3/8 notes, which are beamed together. This situation happens frequently, and you can see how it looks different. This is compound, this is simple. Simple meter, same order of notes, is going to sound different. Okay, so I'm going to do them back to back. Here's first the compound meter, the 6/8. So I will first do this rhythm. I will keep the same pulse, so you'll be able to hear the difference from one to the next. So first, starting with compound. Do da dee do da dee do. Do da dee do da dee do. Do. Now simple. Do day 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 do.